As the PSN moved out of its launch window, the library began to diversify with an important art game, but started to lean into arcade ports of varying quality. GripShift arrived as the first major PSN release of 2007, presenting a unique hybrid of stunt racing and platforming. Players navigated customizable vehicles across floating, convoluted tracks, where the objective was often not just speed, but solving environmental puzzles and collecting stars using floaty, air-controllable physics. The title was a textbook example of the early PSP to PS3 porting strategy, offering a significantly enhanced 720p version of the handheld original that scratched the itch for fans of both Super Monkey Ball and Trackmania. While the PS3 release controversially removed the track editor found in the PSP original, it attempted to compensate with a technical performance upgrade. The game ran at a locked 60 frames per second at 720p, doubling the 30 FPS cap of the handheld original. Additionally, the PS3 version expanded the game's reach by implementing online multiplayer via the PlayStation Network. This allowed for global matchmaking in race and deathmatch modes, replacing the PSP's local ad hoc limitations and transforming GripShift into a genuinely competitive online experience. Q*bert arrived on PSN as a faithful emulation of the 1982 arcade classic, updating the isometric pyramid hopper with smoothed-out high-definition sprites and online leaderboards. However, the release is perhaps best remembered for its ill-advised implementation of 6-axis motion controls. Critics widely panned the optional feature, noting that the game's requirement for precise 45-degree inputs was fundamentally incompatible with the vague tilt sensors of the early PS3 controller, leading to frequent accidental deaths. The release marked the beginning of a retro dump trend on the storefront, reflected in a punishing Metacritic score that criticized the bare-bones nature of the port. Yet, it contained a hidden historical homage that most launch players missed entirely. The developers attempted to replicate the original arcade cabinet's knocker, a solenoid that physically struck the wood casing when the character fell, using controller vibration. Ironically, because the launch 6-axis controllers lacked rumble motors, this faithful detail remained imperceptible until the DualShock 3 was released years later. Flow is arguably the most culturally significant early release on the PlayStation Network, marking the console debut of that game company and director Genova Chen. Originally created as a flash game for Chen's master's thesis at USC, the project was an academic experiment based on the psychological concept of flow, the mental state of total immersion. Its release established the art game genre on consoles, laying the groundwork for future indie masterpieces like Flower and Journey. The game's design was a direct application of this academic theory, utilizing a unique dynamic difficulty adjustment system embedded in the environment. Instead of navigating menus, players intuitively controlled the challenge by consuming specific food: red organisms to dive deeper into danger, or blue ones to retreat to safety. This allowed players of all skill levels to maintain their specific flow state organically while navigating the surreal environment using motion-only 6-axis controls. Flow was a rare exception where tilt mechanics felt essential to the experience rather than a gimmick. Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection was a landmark release for the PlayStation Network, proving for the first time that AAA arcade fighters could thrive as digital downloads. This upscaled port ran at a flawless 1080p and 60 frames per second, while also testing the bandwidth limits of 2007 with its massive, for the time, 600 megabyte file size. It introduced newcomers Li Li and Dragunov, and eventually received an online expansion patch, signaling the future of the genre's distribution model. For hardcore fans, however, the most significant change was in the roster's accessibility. This version marked the first time the formidable final boss, Jinpachi Mishima, was officially playable on a console without the use of cheat devices or hacks. Previously restricted as a non-playable antagonist in the original PS2 release, his legitimate inclusion as a playable fighter fundamentally altered the competitive landscape and served as a major incentive for veterans to purchase the digital upgrade. Released during a quiet period for the franchise before its 2011 reboot, this PSN version of Mortal Kombat II served as a key part of Midway's initiative to digitize their back catalog prior to the company's bankruptcy. Developed by Backbone Entertainment, the release offered an arcade-perfect emulation that stripped away the censorship typical of 90s console ports, retaining every pixel of blood and gore from the 1993 original. While the inclusion of online multiplayer was its primary selling point, the experience was frequently marred by the input lag common to early fighting game ports on the system. The release also highlighted a fascinating shift in industry culture regarding the game's famous friendship finishers. Originally introduced as a satirical response to congressional hearings on video game violence, these non-violent endings, like Raiden summoning a Kid Thunder doll, were fully preserved in this version. In an amusing stroke of historical irony, later releases not only included them, but gamified them with trophies, effectively celebrating the very content that was once designed as a thumb to the nose at the political outrage.
Friendship?
In the next journal, we'll look at how the PlayStation Network experienced a flash flood of arcade ports leading into a summer of innovation.